Kaliningrad was Putin's most valuable chess piece in Europe. A bargaining card, a threat against the West, but it was also his weakest point because every supply line keeping its massive Baltic base and 1 million people alive had to pass through enemy territory. The West tolerated this red line of Putin's for years, until the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. After that, his neighbors turned that weakness into a weapon. Now, Kaliningrad is being blockaded with steel walls along its borders. The Soviet-era power grid supplying the region is being cut off and rail and road lines are being severed. Poland was the pioneer of this transformation. Since 2022, it had been gradually increasing pressure on Kaliningrad. Customs controls tightened, the visa regime narrowed, border crossings slowed. But in December 2025, Warsaw escalated to an entirely different level. On December 23rd, the last Russian consulate in Gdansk was shut down. This was no ordinary diplomatic decision. That building had spent years functioning as a SIGINT center monitoring NATO activities in the Baltic Sea. Its rooftop antennas tracked the port, NATO vessels, and radio traffic. The Poznan consulate had been closed earlier, a critical intelligence node observing NATO exercises, tank shipments, and ammunition trains in western Poland. Kyiv shared the same fate. Russia no longer has any official presence in Poland outside the Warsaw embassy. The Kaliningrad garrison lost its eyes in western Poland, and a military unit fighting blind cannot plan its defense. And while Poland was blinding those intelligence eyes, it was simultaneously building the physical wall. The Eastern Shield project was announced in May 2024. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk called it the largest fortification operation on the eastern border since 1945. Initial excavation began near Goldap in October 2024, but intensive construction truly accelerated in January 2026. Tusk shared drone footage of the progress. A $2.5 billion budget, 3 defense lines along 700 kilometers of border, anti-tank trenches 4 kilometers deep, 6 rows of concrete dragons, teeth barriers, camouflage bunkers, and mine-laying systems. In April 2026, German engineering units deployed to Poland on a 2-year mission. Their task is to support Eastern Shield construction. On a separate track, Germany is deploying approximately 5,000 troops and 105 Leopard 2 A8 tanks to Lithuania. The first time the German military has permanently stationed forces abroad since World War II. NATO's military weight is increasing both south and north of Kaliningrad. The goal is to fortify 38% of the border by the end of 2026. This military fortification also transformed the commercial face of the border. On January 6, 2026, Poland's Ministry of Interior Affairs made a critical decision. It completely closed the Granovo and Goldap border crossings with Kaliningrad. The same day, 8 crossings with Belarus were also shut down. The justification: hybrid threats and irregular migration. The decision took immediate effect with exceptions only for humanitarian convoys. Only 2 active crossings remained on the Kaliningrad side: Gajahotki to Mamovo II and Bezi to Bratonovsk. Until 2022, these were bustling trade gates where Kaliningrad residents went shopping in Gdansk on weekends. Now Polish border guards allow a maximum of 5 vehicles per hour to pass. Lines of 8 to 12 hours form at the border. People waiting have no access to basic needs like water, toilets, or food. Most vehicles belong to German citizens, ethnic Russians traveling with their families to Kaliningrad during holiday season. Even individual crossings are this difficult, and commercial transport has taken a far heavier blow. Insurance companies now classify the Kaliningrad route as a war zone risk and refuse to insure vehicles. Since no truck can operate without insurance, even the 2 crossings that remain open on paper are effectively closed for the freight sector. The result? The region's transport sector collapsed. The figures reflect 18,000 truck drivers left unemployed. Trucks are rusting in garages. Shipping companies are going bankrupt. For a Kaliningrad family, Gdansk, that European city just 120 kilometers away, is now an unreachable world. And all of this is just the defensive dimension. Poland also conducted its most comprehensive military exercise, CRY 2026, in April to May 2026. The President, Prime Minister, all cabinet ministers, and military commanders participated. The scenario: a full-scale major war with an eastern neighbor. Declaration of martial law and relocation of the government to secret command centers were rehearsed. In the words of Polish Defense Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz, this is not just Poland's border. It is the border of the European Union and NATO. The message is clear. Kaliningrad's southern gate has been sealed, and the key is in Warsaw's pocket. The southern gate is sealed. What about the eastern gate, the railway running through Lithuania to the Russian mainland? Kaliningrad's survival depended on this single line for decades. Fuel, cement, steel, coal, food, everything feeding 1 million people, and a massive military garrison passed through Lithuanian railways. When this line is cut, Kaliningrad cannot breathe. And Lithuania has been testing this step by step since 2022. The first test came in June 2022. Lithuania cited EU sanctions to restrict the transit of strategic goods like steel and cement. Kaliningrad Governor Anton Alekhanov raised the alarm. We'll lose 40 to 50% of our transit goods. The Kremlin responded furiously, promising serious consequences. But Lithuania was a NATO member, and there was no real force behind those threats. Putin bluffed. Lithuania didn't flinch, and NATO clearly saw how powerful a strategic weapon Kaliningrad's transit dependency could be. The exposure of that bluff lit the green light for tightening the vice. As the sanctions list expanded, the variety of goods turned back at the border grew. Construction materials, luxury goods, electronics blocked one by one. Local concrete operator Igor Pleskov captures the human face of the crisis. We can't produce even a single cubic meter of concrete. Cement-carrying trains are being turned back at the Lithuanian border. Kaliningrad's construction sector ground to a halt. Started projects were left unfinished. Access to raw materials was cut. But the real blow was triggered by Lithuania's own internal security crisis. In November 2025, smuggling balloons carrying contraband cigarettes sent from Belarus paralyzed Vilnius airport. 25 flights were affected, 3,500 passengers stranded. Lithuania recorded this as a deliberate hybrid attack by the Belarusian regime and closed its border crossings with Belarus. The decision created a domino effect. Thousands of Lithuanian-plated trucks carrying freight in Belarusian territory were suddenly stranded. According to the Lenava Transport Association, 4,500 to 5,000 trucks and trailers were held hostage. Lutsenko chose blackmail over diplomacy, threatening to seize the vehicles, moving them to paid parking lots. But Lithuania didn't back down. It raised the stakes because the balloon crisis gave Lithuania exactly the justification it needed. On October 31st, just days after balloons paralyzed Vilnius airport, Lithuanian Railways LTG made a critical announcement, citing compliance with US and UK sanctions on Lucille and Ross. It initiated a 21-day transition period for the transit of Russian petroleum products to Kaliningrad. From that point, no new applications were accepted. On November 21st, the transition period expired and Lucille's petroleum flow stopped completely. The numbers tell the story of the shock. In 2024, 371,000 tons of petroleum products were transported through this line. 345,000 tons belonged to Lucille. In 2025, before the ban, another 194,000 tons had passed through. Now zero. This is Kaliningrad's civilian fuel, buses, ambulances, generators that prevent freezing in winter. And at the same time, it's the fuel for the Baltic fleet and Iskander missile launchers. Without petroleum, those missiles become stationary targets that cannot move. And Lithuania has no intention of stopping here. Ruling party leader Minda Sinovicius openly said that transit restrictions to Kaliningrad can be considered implying the complete halt of all railway freight transport, including fertilizer and petroleum products. An even more radical threat sits on the table: the complete removal of the rails. The Baltic states are preparing to abandon the Soviet-era wide-gauge rail standard and switch to the European standard. The Rail Baltica project will lay modern high-speed rail from Tallinn to Warsaw by 2030. There is no legal barrier. The 2002 Russia-EU-Lithuania transit agreement only covered passenger visas. It did not guarantee rail standards. If this happens, it will become physically impossible for Russian trains to reach Kaliningrad. And this time, it's not a bluff. The road is closed, the railway is cut, but the biggest danger is energy. For decades, Kaliningrad was kept alive by a Soviet-era shared electrical grid called BREL. Belarus, Russia, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania shared the same frequency. The Baltic states decided to sever that connection and completed their transition to Europe's ENT grid. Kaliningrad is now, in the truest sense of the word, an energy island. Russia deployed the floating LNG terminal Marshal Vasilevsky as preparation. We'll generate our own electricity, they said, but independent energy experts are flagging deadly risks. First, frequency instability. If you're not connected to a large grid, a single power plant malfunction plunges the entire city into darkness. Hospitals, factories, water pumps, they all go down at once. Second, cost. Gas delivered by ship is vastly more expensive than gas from a pipeline, and this cost will be passed on to an already sinking industry and to citizens' utility bills. Third, weather dependency. In November 2025, the Baltic Sea froze early. Icebreakers could only get 2 shipments through, and each tanker kept Kaliningrad running for just 12 days. Putin's emergency plan turned out to be a weather-dependent lottery. Now, when we place all these layers side by side, the equation emerges. Kaliningrad had 3 supply lines, road effectively closed by Poland's eastern shield, 18,000 drivers unemployed, crossing times reaching 14 days. Railway, Lithuania halted petroleum transit. 371,000 tons of fuel flow cut, rail removal on the agenda, energy, an electricity island after the Braille disconnection, the floating LNG terminal, a weather-dependent gamble. What remains is the sea route, but the sea route is 4 times more expensive than road. Ferries are insufficient, and port infrastructure can't handle the load. And with Finland and Sweden joining NATO, the Baltic Sea is a NATO lake. Those ships are targets for anyone who's seen what Ukraine did to the Russian Navy in the Black Sea. Putin's choice is painful. Keeping Kaliningrad alive requires enormous resources. The cost of every ton of diesel has doubled. Ships wait in line for weeks. But those same resources are needed to feed the army in Ukraine. In the first quarter of 2026, Russia was losing 35,000 soldiers per month, while monthly mobilization stood at just 27,000. The equation is already negative, and Kaliningrad's logistics cost is bound to make it worse. Despite this entire strangulation operation, Russia's hand is not entirely empty. Kaliningrad remains the site where nuclear-capable Iskander-M missiles are deployed, keeping Warsaw, Berlin, and Copenhagen within range. This blackmail card is one of Putin's last remaining trumps, and the Kremlin never tires of reminding everyone. But blackmail only works if the other side believes it. During the 2022 railway crisis, the Kremlin threatened serious consequences. Lithuania didn't flinch because it had NATO's Article 5 guarantee behind it. In April 2026, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Alexander Grushko described NATO's Baltic exercises as rehearsals for seizing Kaliningrad and warned of retaliation, but he couldn't take any concrete step because an army bogged down in Ukraine cannot open a second front. The threats grow less credible each time, and while Russia's threats weaken, NATO's capacity grows stronger. U.S. European Command General Christopher Donahue says it plainly. We can neutralize Kaliningrad from land in an unprecedented time frame. This is not a bluff. Behind it stands Poland's Eastern Shield, Lithuania's new 4,000-soldier training facility at Suwalki, and NATO's naval dominance in the Baltic Sea. If nuclear blackmail doesn't work, increasing sea resupply is the only practical option. Ferry traffic has risen 15% with ships running from Luga to Baltic. But this route has 3 fatal problems. First, cost. Every ton shipped by sea is 4 times more expensive than by road, and this cost is passed directly to citizens' bills and industry's profit margins. Second, capacity. Ferries are slow and can never match the volume of trains, with some truck drivers reporting waits of over 2 months at port. Third, security. With Finland and Sweden's accession, the Baltic Sea is a NATO lake. Those ships are potential targets for anyone who's seen what Ukraine did to the Russian Navy in the Black Sea. In winter, ice or storms can shut the route down entirely. Despite all this, Kaliningrad has one bright spot: domestic tourism. Russians unable to travel abroad have flocked to the region. Krovo Airport set records of 4 million passengers in 2023 and exceeded 5 million in 2025. But these domestic tourists bring no foreign currency. The $500 million in foreign tourist revenue from 2019 dropped to $100 million in 2025. Hotels are full but budget. Tourism provides breathing room, but it can't sustain a city, and Russia cannot abandon Kaliningrad. Symbolically, it represents the World War II victory. Geopolitically, ice-free access to the Baltic Sea. Militarily, an advanced A node in the heart of NATO. Retreat is politically inexplicable domestically, so Moscow must hold it, but the cost of holding it rises every month. According to a Lithuanian intelligence report, Russia is forming new naval infantry units in Kaliningrad, while at the same time the Ukrainian front is draining resources. A fire department caught between two fires. In 2022, Kaliningrad had 3 supply lines: road, railway, energy. All 3 were open. All 3 were functioning. Now the road is sealed with dragon's teeth. On the railway, Lucille's 371,000-ton petroleum flow has dropped to 0. The electrical grid is severed. What remains is a CU route operating at astronomical costs under NATO surveillance. Real power is measured not by who you can threaten, but by what you can sustain. And Kaliningrad can sustain nothing. Right now, the red lines have been drawn. If you found this content interesting, don't forget to like, leave a comment, and follow the